how does a government actually decide where to spend, these vast sums of money? Tens, hundreds of billions of pounds every year. It's not just abstract figures, is it? It affects everything. The healthcare you get, the state of your local roads, opportunities. So today we're doing a deep dive into the UK government's latest roadmap for all that the HM Treasury Spending Review, the June 2025 document. This isn't some vague wish list. It's the detailed plan. It lays out the government's priorities, crucially, how they plan to fund them over the next few years. Our mission, really, is to cut through the complexity here, pull out the key insights, and basically give you a shortcut to understanding what this major announcement actually means.
Exactly. And, right from the outset, the document frames this as something quite significant. Not just tweaking the dials, it's explicitly linked to delivering their overall plan for change. The focus is very much on building resilient, building opportunity across the UK. They clearly see this review as a key moment.
Okay, so let's unpack it then. Starting with the big picture, the context. This spending review, SR25, they call it, it doesn't exist in a vacuum, right? It builds on things like the autumn budget last year, the spring statement earlier this year.
Yes, and what's immediately striking, I think, is the emphasis they place on fundamentally reforming the fiscal framework itself. They talk about introducing these new, non-negotiable fiscal rules. The stated aim is, well, more transparency, certainty, stability for the public finances. After, let's face it, a pretty volatile period. It feels like a deliberate attempt to draw some clearer lines in the sand for spending.
And the economic picture they paint to justify this, it's quite specific and, well, pretty optimistic, wouldn't you say? The document says the UK economy has been resilient. It even claims, quote, fastest growth in the G7 for the first quarter of this year. And they point to the Bank of England and the IMF upgrading GDP forecasts for 2025 as kind of validation.
They also flag the ongoing trade efforts, strengthening partnerships, new deals mentioned with the U.S., India, the EU. A new trade strategy is apparently forthcoming. But crucially, it's not presented as job done. The document acknowledges, quote, there is still further to go to address the long-term challenges. Which, sort of sets the stage for potentially tough choices within the review itself.
Right. And to tackle those long-term challenges, they're bringing out the big guns, apparently. This SR is underpinned by the first zero-based review in nearly 18 years. Now, zero-based review, that sounds significant. It means departments can't just ask for a bit more than last year.
Exactly. They essentially have to justify every single pound of spending from scratch. Imagine starting with a blank sheet of paper. It forces a really deep look at everything they do. They frame it as a way to, and I quote, ruthlessly bear down on waste and really focus the money on their stated national priorities, security, health, and the economy.
So the big question this raises is, how does this intensive back-to-basics approach actually, change where the money goes in practice? Does it lead to big shifts?
So that focus on national priorities takes us straight into the first major section they detail.
Okay, let's dive into that first one then. Security. The document's pretty unequivocal here. Keeping the country safe is the government's first duty.
And you see that directly in the defense spending figures. The plan seems consistent with what they announced back in February. It confirms the intention to raise defense spending to 2.6% of GDP by 2027. And then there's this ambition to hit 3% in the next parliament, but with the caveat, when economic and fiscal conditions allow. Reaching 3%, that would be a really major step, wouldn't it? Putting the UK in quite a small group of NATO countries.
Yeah, definitely. And it's not just defense hardware. There's also a notable funding boost for the intelligence agencies MI5, MI6, GCHQ. Their budgets are set to go up by $600 million in real terms over the review period. The document ties this directly to keeping up with technology, countering threats from, quote, hostile states, and supporting that wider strategic defense review. It signals security threats are seen as increasingly tech-driven.
Border security gets a lot of emphasis too, and it's explicitly linked to tackling dangerous small boat crossings and cutting irregular migration. There's specific funding for the new Border Security Command, up to $280 million extra for running costs, that's RDEL, by 2028-29. And it's specifically earmarked, they say, to tackle the people smuggling gangs.
Okay, turning to the justice system, which they sort of bracket under security as well as safer streets, national security. And there's a really substantial chunk of money here. £7 billion from 2024 right through to 2029-30, specifically to build 14,000 new prison places by 2031. That's a massive construction program for the prison estate.
And alongside capacity, there's the rehabilitation side. The document mentions increased funding to transform the probation system. This seems based on that recent sentencing review. The funding ramps up by up to £700 million a year by 2028-29 compared to 2025-26 levels. The aim, presumably, is better supervision, reducing reoffending rates.
And policing, also under the security umbrella. Police spending power is set to increase average 2.3% per year in real terms over the SR period. They say this is about supporting frontline policing in England and Wales, boosting public confidence, and delivering on that pledge for 13,000 additional officers, PCSOs, and special constables in neighborhood roles. More visible policing, essentially.
Yeah, and a recurring theme across all these areas, something the document really stresses, is that it's not just about throwing money at problems. Investment is meant to go hand in hand with reform. They mention things like improving NHS productivity. We'll probably come back to that earlier intervention in children's social care, those transformative reforms to sentencing we just talked about. So connecting it back to the big picture, this focus on security and borders, it's clearly driving spending increases in places like the Home Office and Ministry of Justice. Although it is interesting to note, the overall Home Office budget plan actually shows a real terms decrease once you factor in the expected fall in asylum costs. So the extra money is very targeted, isn't it? Borders, policing, not across the board.
That's a really important nuance. Okay, let's shift gear then. The next critical mission area, public services and opportunity. And the document pulls no punches here, does it? It bluntly states public service outcomes have been declining. That's the problem they're trying to fix.
And to tackle that, they state that because of tax decisions already made, day-to-day spending across government, the running costs will increase by 1.7% per year on average in real terms. That's from 2023-24 up to 2028-29. Now that compares to a previously planned rise of only 0.7%. So it's quite a significant uplift for public services overall, more than double what was previously penciled in. They also make a point of highlighting record levels of capital investment, the money for buildings, infrastructure, big kit.
Right. And within public services, let's do the deep dive on the NHS. It's clearly a massive priority. Significant investment and reform is the headlines, the numbers. On average, NHS England gets 3.0% real terms growth in its day-to-day budget over the SR period.
Right.
They calculate this adds up to a 29 billion real terms annual increase by the end of the period compared to the start. That's a huge amount. And the capital budget for buildings, tech, etc. also gets a big boost, up by 2.3 billion in real terms by 2029-30. That's over a 20% real increase, clearly a major political and financial priority.
And a key goal for all that money, probably the one people feel most directly, is cutting waiting lists. The stated commitment is to get back to that target of 92% of patients starting consultant-led treatment within 18 weeks. That's by the end of the Parliament. The document gives the current context, which is pretty stark. Under 60% are meeting that target right now. The waiting list is 7.4 million, though they do note it's fallen by about 200,000 recently. And there's explicit funding mentioned for an extra 2 million appointments in the first year, just to try and make a dent in that backlog.
Okay, and they talk about these three big shifts for the NHS. This gives us a clue about the type of reform they want, doesn't it? Beyond just more money. First is analog to digital. Massive investment here, up to 10 billion NHS tech and digital transformation by 2028-29. That's nearly a 50% increase from 2025-26 levels. Specific goals include turning the NHS app into a proper digital front door and, the holy grail really, delivering a single patient record. Anyone who's chased their notes around the system knows how vital that could be. Though achieving it across the whole NHS, well, that's proven incredibly difficult historically, hasn't it?
It certainly has. The second shift is treatment to prevention. The classic upstream argument, stop people getting sick in the first place. The main example they give is investing at least £80 million a year specifically for stop smoking programs. And the third shift, hospital to community. Moving more care out of acute settings. This involves extra funding by 2028-29 to train thousands more GPs and deliver millions more primary care appointments.
They also tackle NHS productivity head-on. The document says acute productivity is, about 8% below pre-pandemic levels? That's a big gap. So the funding package is tied to achieving a pretty ambitious 2% productivity growth per year. They claim this will unlock £17 billion in savings over 3 years, which then gets reinvested. But achieving 2% productivity growth year on year in a system as complex as the NHS, that's a huge ask. It seems key to making the funding deliver.
Oh, and they casually mention the abolition of NHS England as a decision taken streamlining the national body.
Yeah, it slipped in there.
Adult social care is also mentioned, obviously vital. A commitment to transform the sector. The document points to an increase of over £4 billion in funding available by 2028-29 compared to 2025-26. References Baroness Casey's Independent Commission, which is due to report its first phase in 2026. So more detail to come there, presumably. And life sciences gets a nod too, up to $600 million for a health data research service, plus up to $520 million for manufacturing funding. Building domestic resilience seems to be the theme.
Okay, let's move across to opportunity for all, focusing on education now. The goal stated is pretty clear. Widen opportunity, give kids the best start. The core schools budget in England gets a £2 billion real terms increase over the SR period. That translates to a £4.7 billion cash increase per year by 2028-29. They present this as ensuring 1.1% real terms growth per pupil per year.
And improving the actual school buildings is reaffirmed as a priority. The commitment to rebuild over 500 schools is there, £2.4 billion a year for 4 years. Plus, they flag that this commitment extends out to 2034-35 under the longer-term 10-year infrastructure strategy. And annual maintenance for existing schools also gets a boost over $400 million more per year by 2029-30.
There's also some quite specific direct support for children highlighted, expanding free school meals eligibility in England, there's a big one, to include all children whose parents get universal credit. They cost that at $410 million a year by 2028-29. And the document makes a direct link, stating this measure alone will lift 100,000 children out of poverty. Ties into an upcoming child poverty strategy. Other things mentioned are expanding the Family Hubs program and funding breakfast clubs for every primary child in England, starting with 750 early adopters. These feel like very targeted measures to ease pressures on families.
Yes, very specific interventions. The document also briefly mentions reforming the special educational needs and disability SEND system. That's a really complex and pressured area. Details are promised in the school's white paper this autumn, so that will be crucial. What really stands out in this whole public services section is that huge NHS investment figure, but tied very explicitly to those demanding productivity targets. And then these very tangible targeted support measures like the free school meals expansion. It highlights that tension between big system investment and direct help.
Okay, let's pivot now to the economy mission, delivering strong, secure, and sustainable economic growth. That's the goal, to boost living standards. And they're pretty blunt about the challenge, aren't they? Pointing directly to flatlining productivity, stagnant real wage growth over the last 14 years, setting a high bar for themselves.
They certainly are. And the scale of investment they're proposing to tackle this is, well, substantial. The document states the government is investing an additional $120 billion over the SR period compared to what was previously planned. This means public sector net investment, so government spending on infrastructure, R&D, big projects, will average 2.6% of GDP over the parliament. That's significantly up from the 1.7% previously planned.
And they list things they say they've already done to get growth going. A revised planning framework, the Planning and Infrastructure Bill, approving 18 major infrastructure projects, getting $50 billion from pension funds for productive investment, backing Heathrow expansion, presenting it as building momentum.
Transport investment gets highlighted as critical for growth, connecting places, and there's a clear signal of pivoting towards cities and towns, explicitly addressing historic underinvestment, particularly in the North and Midlands. There's $15.6 billion by 2031-32 allocated for Transport for City Regions TCR settlements for the metro mayors. Now, these TCR deals give mayors long-term consolidated funding pots. The document says this will more than double real-term spending per year by 2029-30 compared to before, giving local leaders more clout, more certainty. And for areas outside those mayoral regions, there's a £2.3 billion local transport grant phase 2, described as a fourfold increase in funding by 2029-30. So it looks like a conscious effort to spread the transport cash around more.
Innovation and R&D also flagged as key growth drivers. Investment here is set to rise to $22.6 billion a year by 2029-30. They say that's an above-inflation increase. Specifics include a $500 million R&D missions accelerator program designed to pull in $1.5 billion of private money and a new $410 million local innovation partnerships fund involving local leaders, and quite eye-catchingly $750 million for a new supercomputer up at Edinburgh University, big boost for research power.
And this is where it gets really forward-looking, particularly on tech. Artificial intelligence. A huge £2 billion allocated specifically for AI from 2026-27 through to 2029-30. They state this fully delivers their commitment to harness AI's potential. And the breakdown is fascinating. Building sovereign AI capability, that means at least a 20-fold expansion of the UK's AI research resource.
Right.
Basically, the massive computing power needed. Backing UK AI companies via a new UK sovereign AI unit, develop AI skills, funding university courses, fellowships, a new 48 million tech expert talent scholarship, helping businesses actually use AI through a new AI adoption fund, and, critically important, 240 million for the AI Security Institute, focusing on the risks. That's a very comprehensive package.
It really is. And skills generally, beyond AI, are presented as essential for growth, too, making sure people have the right training. An additional $1.2 billion per year by 2028-29 includes support for over 1.3 million 16-19-year-olds in training, and a specific $625 million pot between 2025-28 to train up to 60,000 skilled construction workers, addressing a very clear bottleneck there.
And the regional growth strategy really weaves through this whole section. A clear message about investing across the country, not just in London and the Southeast. There's a new local growth fund, mentioned a 10-year capital settlement for certain mayoral city regions in the North and Midlands. Long-term certainty again. Plus investment in up to 350 deprived communities across the UK. And they mention reforms to the Green Book. That's the Treasury's rulebook for assessing public investment projects. The aim is to ensure objective advice, quote, including outside London and the Southeast. The implication being the old rules might have favored the Southeast, and they want to level that playing field.
The SR also explicitly backs the upcoming modern industrial strategy, highlighting those key sectors: clean energy, creative industries, digital tech, finance, life sciences, professional services. What's fascinating here is how they try to connect the dots. The AI investment, the skills training, the regional funds presented as this interconnected engine for growth everywhere. The big question for me, though, given those challenges like stagnant productivity, how quickly can these big specific investments like the AI boost or the regional transport funds actually make a noticeable difference for you, for businesses in different parts of the UK? That's the key test, isn't it?
Absolutely. Which brings us neatly on to how the government plans to reform itself to make sure all this money, all taxpayer money, is spent well.
Right, the push for a productive and agile state, as they call it. A fundamental rewiring, using tech like digital and AI to transform how government actually works and delivers services.
And that means a step change, they say, in investment for digital transformation across departments. Funding to build digital foundations, modernize old systems, overhaul productivity. They highlight a $1.2 billion uplift for DSIT, that's the Science and Tech Department, for its cross-cutting digital priorities. Total $1.9 billion over the SR. Specific initiatives mentioned include boosting the gov.uk wallet, an app for more personalized services, and creating a new national data library.
They give a specific example, too, which helps make it concrete. HMRC's digital transformation, an extra $500 million ARM investment. And the target is pretty ambitious. By 2029-30, they want at least 90% of customer interactions to be digital self-serve. That's up from about 70% now. The aim is faster, easier service for most taxpayers. Though, importantly, the document does commit to keeping phone lines and other channels open for those who need them.
And that push for a cost-conscious culture comes up again, linked back to that zero-based review. The document says all departments had to find at least 5% savings and efficiencies by 2028-29. The idea being that money is then repurposed towards those key priorities we've discussed, rather than just being cut. A reallocation, essentially.
And specific measures to close the tax gap, the difference between tax owed and collected. $1.7 billion over 4 years for thousands more HMRC compliance and debt management staff. The goal: raise an extra £7.5 billion in tax revenue a year by 2029-30, cracking down on evasion, basically.
Other efficiency drives get a mention, too. Reducing spending on external consultants, they expect to save over £700 million a year by 2028-29, cutting that spend by half. Combating fraud gets flagged, embedding prevention. The COVID Counter-Fraud Commissioner scrutinizing pandemic spending.
And the civil service itself. The aim is a cost-effective, high-performing civil service. Plans to cut administration costs by at least 11% in real terms by 2028-29, rising to 16% by 2029-30. They claim this saves £2.2 billion in that final year alone. There's a $150 million transformation fund mentioned, partly for employee exit schemes. Suggests headcount reduction in some areas.
But it's not just cuts. There's also talk of building capability, especially digital skills. A target for 1 in 10 civil servants to be in digital roles by 2030. A strategic workforce plan is coming, and $50 million from that transformation fund is earmarked for workforce productivity, learning, reducing reliance on external trainers. So investment alongside the efficiency drive.
Okay, let's bring in the regional growth and devolution details here too, as it touches on how government funding flows across the UK. The document keeps stressing these investment decisions aim to drive growth everywhere.
And specifically on funding for the devolved governments. Scotland, Wales, Northern Ireland, the UK government is providing a $14.9 billion cash increase between 2023-24 and 2028-29. They calculate this as 1% annual average real terms growth. And they say these are the largest SR settlements in real terms since devolution in 1998, making a point about the scale.
They give the Barnett formula specifics too. Devolved governments get, on average, 4.8 billion taus a year via Barnett for day-to-day spending, and 930 million a year for capital projects over the relevant periods. The specific annual averages are laid out. Scotland, 50.9 billion a year, Wales, 22.4 billion, Northern Ireland, 19.3 billion. Barnett being that mechanism that automatically adjusts their block grants based on UK government spending changes in England.
Yes, and the document makes a specific point about relative funding levels per person. It states devolved governments receive at least 20% more per person than equivalent UK government spending in the rest of the UK. And what? The figures given are Scotland over 20% more, Wales over 20% more, Northern Ireland over 24% more. And they add that the devolved administrations are funded above their independently assessed levels of need, citing the OBR. There's also £2.2 billion mentioned in targeted funding on top of Barnett for specific joint priorities or UK-wide initiatives.
And they give examples of that UK-wide investment benefiting devolved nations. Defence projects like Ajax vehicles in Wales, the Clyde 2070 programme in Scotland, 250-metre initial investment mention, local growth stuff like city and growth deals getting funding, 218 metres for Wales deals, 310 metres for NI, mention of engaging with the INET carbon capture project in Wales, funding the Brand Wales programme, £2.4 metres.
So what does this all boil down to for how government works and where money goes? You've got this drive for digital efficiency within UK departments, but also substantial real terms funding increases for devolved governments, plus these targeted regional funds. It's quite a complex picture of different funding paths, isn't it?
It really is. And that leads us finally to connecting the growth mission with a huge clean energy mission, delivering clean power by 2030, accelerating towards net zero. And major energy projects are definitely front and center here. A massive $14.2 billion investment allocated for Sizewell C nuclear power station, described as the first state-backed nuclear project since 1988. Over $8.3 billion to be invested through Great British Energy and Great British Energy Nuclear in homegrown clean power. Over $2.5 billion for a small modular reactor SMR program with Rolls-Royce SMR named preferred bidder, and another $2.5 billion plus for nuclear fusion research, the STEP program. That's a huge bet on nuclear, both current and future tech.
Absolutely. Then there's the Warm Homes Plan. Significant investment here, too. $13.2 billion over the SR period. That includes $5 billion in financial transactions, so loans or equity, not just grants. This is all aimed at cutting energy bills by upgrading homes, insulation, heat pumps, solar panels. The stated goal is cutting bills by hundreds of pounds per year, and it's explicitly linked to accelerating net zero by boosting energy efficiency.
Carbon capture, usage, and storage, CCUS, vital for industries that are hard to decarbonize. That gets $9.4 billion allocated over the SR, supporting those industrial clusters like on the East Coast and HyNet, which involves Wales.
Decarbonizing transport gets £2.6 billion in capital investment between 2026-29. Includes $1.4 billion for EV uptake cars, vans, HGVs, and $400 million specifically for charging points. And investment in climate adaptation isn't forgotten. Over $2.7 billion a year for sustainable farming and nature recovery until 2028-29, and $4.2 billion over 3 years for flood defenses in England, dealing with the impacts we're already seeing.
The document also handily pulls together a summary of various measures aimed directly at the cost of living, some we've touched on. Things like the increased national living wage, frozen fuel duty, the state pension increase, that Warm Homes Plan, increasing the winter fuel payments threshold, extending the £3 bus fare cap, expanding free school meals, support for breakfast clubs, a new crisis and resilience fund, £1 expanding childcare entitlements, £1.6 burner, and capping branded school uniform costs. A real mix of support measures presented together. What's really interesting in this final section is how intertwined those growth and net zero missions are presented. Investments like nuclear and home insulation are framed as hitting both environmental and economic or cost of living goals. It really poses the question, though, how well will these huge long-term energy investments balance that critical need for transition with the very immediate financial pain many families are feeling right now?
Indeed. So we've covered a huge amount today, really getting into the weeds of this HM Treasury Spending Review document.
Yeah, from strengthening security and reforming justice to pouring billions into the NHS and schools, trying to drive growth with innovation and regional investment, transforming government itself. It's all underpinned by these significant financial plans and supposedly ambitious reforms.
And the government's stated aim, just to reiterate, is using this review to deliver their plan for change, building strong foundations, driving growth, improving public services, all while aiming for economic stability with those new fiscal rules.
But fundamentally, this document, it isn't just numbers, is it? It's the government's blueprint for how billions of your money, taxpayer money, will be spent in the coming years. On services, on initiatives that directly shape your life, your family's life, and the country's future direction.
So thinking about everything we've discussed, digital hospitals, AI creeping into government, new prisons, regional growth funds, those massive nuclear projects, which of these areas do you think actually has the potential to deliver the most significant, most tangible change for the UK over the next few years? Something to ponder.